Have you ever, wondered why women seem to hold on to their mental sharpness a bit better as they age? I mean, it's something I've definitely noticed. And there's this really cool new research that might just hold the key. It's hinting at a potential genetic advantage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's some fascinating work coming out of UCSF, the University of California, San Francisco. They've been looking into, the role of the X chromosome
Okay.
and particularly how it influences how our cognitive abilities change as we get older.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, right? We're going to unpack this new discovery, what the scientists found, and most importantly, what it can mean for, you, the listener, and your brain health as you age. And we're basing this deep dive on some super interesting research straight from UCSF.
And, this research builds on something we've kind of already observed. Women tend to live longer, right? And they often seem to show a real resilience in their cognitive abilities as they get older. This new research might give us like a genetic explanation for why that is.
Okay, so let's break this down. We're talking about X chromosomes. Everyone probably remembers the basics from, biology class. Women have two X chromosomes, and men have one X and one Y chromosome. But here's where it gets really interesting. In women, one of those X chromosomes is usually, switched off, right? Why is that?
Yeah, you got it. So silencing one X chromosome in females, it's basically a way to prevent too much of certain genes being expressed. Think of it like this. Women have two sets of instructions, right, for certain genes. And silencing one ensures that the production of the proteins from those genes stays balanced with what happens in males who only have one set of instructions. Because having too much of anything, even something good, can throw things off balance.
Right, right. It's like having two faucets but only needing one running to fill a glass of water. But like with most things in biology, it's not quite that straightforward, right? There are exceptions to this silencing rule.
Exactly. Some genes on that mostly inactive X chromosome, they manage to escape this inactivation. It's like imagine a few people working in a factory that's mostly shut down. They kind of keep going with their tasks. These escapee genes, they stay active. They can still produce proteins.
Okay, so that brings us to the UCSF study. How did they actually investigate what these X chromosomes are up to, especially when it comes to aging and cognition? What was their approach?
Well, they used a really clever mouse model. This model allowed them to specifically track the activity of genes on the silent X chromosome in female mice.
Okay.
They compared which genes were active and inactive in young female mice versus older ones.
Yep.
And by doing that, they could see how the activity of those genes changed, as mice aged.
Oh, that's smart. So they're basically looking for changes in gene activity on that switched off X as the mice get older. And what did they find? What were the big takeaways?
Well, the main thing they found was pretty remarkable, actually. It seems that as the female mice aged, some of the previously quiet genes on the X chromosome, they actually woke up. These genes that were mostly inactive when they were younger, they showed increased activity as the mice got older.
Wow, that's really interesting. So it's like a backup system of genes kicking in later in life. Where in the brain was this reactivation most noticeable?
That's a great question. And the answer is even more interesting. It was most prominent in the hippocampus. And as you know, the hippocampus is a super important part of the brain for learning and memory. So seeing this increased activity in such a vital area, immediately makes you think about the cognitive resilience we see in aging females.
Yeah, it's like a big flashing sign saying, look here. Now, were there any specific genes that really stood out in this whole awakening process? Like any key players that seem to be, driving things?
Yes, definitely. One gene in particular, called PLP1, it showed a really noticeable increase in activity in those older female brains. And PLP1 is really important because it's involved in the production of myelin.
Okay, myelin. That's the fatty coating around our nerve fibers, right? It's kind of like the insulation on electrical wires, right? It helps those signals travel faster and more efficiently. So more PLP1 would mean better wiring, so to speak, as we age.
Exactly. Myelin is essential for our brain cells to communicate effectively. So an increase in PLP1 and therefore more myelin production could, potentially help to maintain cognitive function as our brains age. Think of it like keeping those high-speed internet cables in your brain working smoothly.
That makes a lot of sense. And the researchers didn't just observe this increase in PLP1, right? They actually tested its impact.
You're right, they did. In a really fascinating part of the study, they artificially increased PLP1 expression. And they did this in both male and female mice, regardless of their age. And what they found was pretty amazing. This boost in PLP1 actually led to improved cognitive function in both sexes.
So it wasn't just a female-specific benefit. This boost to PLP1 seemed to help across the board. So, I mean, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Could this explain some of those differences we see in how men and women's brains age?
I think it definitely points in that direction.
Yeah.
If a similar reactivation of these beneficial genes on the X chromosome is happening in aging women, it could be a contributing factor to the cognitive resilience we often see. Because men with just one X chromosome wouldn't have that same potential for like a reserved set of genes to kick in. But of course, the big question now is, does this actually happen in humans the same way it does in mice?
Okay, so that's a huge question for future research. But what about the how? Like, what might be causing this awakening of the silent X chromosome later in life? What's flipping the switch, so to speak, on these genes?
The researchers think it probably has to do with changes in gene regulation that happen as we age. This could involve what we call epigenetic markers, things like DNA methylation. You can think of these markers like little tags on our DNA. They can control whether genes are active or not, but they don't change the underlying DNA sequence.
Huh.
It's possible that as we get older, these tags, these off switches on certain X-linked genes become less effective, and that allows the genes to, turn back on.
So, like, our brains might have this built-in mechanism that can kick in over time, maybe as a way to protect themselves. That's a pretty wild concept. Now, if we can really understand this mechanism, could that lead to, like, some real-world applications? Could we actually help people?
Oh, absolutely. If we can figure out how and why these genes are being reactivated, it opens up some really exciting possibilities for therapies, right? Therapies that could mimic this natural genetic boost. Imagine if we could develop treatments that specifically support the activity of genes like PLP1. That could potentially help men and women maintain or even improve their cognitive function as they age.
That would be incredible. But it's important to remember, this is all still pretty early research, right? We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Oh, you're absolutely right. While these findings are very promising, we definitely need more research. We need to confirm whether this X chromosome reactivation is happening in humans the same way it does in mice. And we need to understand, any long-term effects and really get a grasp on the detailed mechanisms involved.
I totally agree. But even at this early stage, this research really underscores how complex our genes are and how much they influence the way we age, especially when it comes to our brains.
Exactly. Understanding those genetic and molecular mechanisms, that's going to be key if we want to develop strategies to promote brain health and help people live longer, healthier lives. And this research highlights a new and potentially very important pathway to explore.
Okay, so to wrap up this part of our deep dive, it sounds like the silent X chromosome might not be so silent after all, right? It could be hiding some really important, potentially beneficial secrets to keeping our minds sharp as we get older.
Exactly. This idea that a chromosome we thought was mostly inactive could actually have this untapped potential to support cognitive health. I mean, it's really exciting, the whole new frontier in aging research.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway here is this really cool discovery. There's a chance that genes on the X chromosome can become reactivated as women age, and that this might be one of the reasons why women often maintain their cognitive abilities so well.
And don't forget about that specific gene, PLP1. It plays a critical role in producing myelin, which is, essential for healthy brain function. And the fact that its activity increased in the older female mice and that boosting it had positive effects in both males and females, well, it hints at some really exciting therapeutic possibilities for the future.
It really gets you thinking, right? Could understanding and harnessing these natural genetic processes be the key to unlocking better cognitive health for everyone, regardless of their sex? It definitely gives us a lot to think about when it comes to aging and the future of brain health.